Hello, everyone, and welcome to SDG Live. We're here at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, to talk about issues that are affecting our world and the Sustainable Development Goals, including gender equality, financing for progress, and technology for social good. Today, I am very pleased to be joined by Saadia Madsbjerg, Managing Director at the Rockefeller Foundation, and we'll be having a conversation on innovative financing, partnerships, and things to look for as we think about how we finance a better future for our world by 2030. So Saadia, first of all, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
Great. So I wonder if we can maybe start by talking a little bit about what Rockefeller is doing on the SDGs collectively. So, Rockefeller has a pretty broad portfolio of issues that you are working on. Everything from health to food to power to resilient cities, innovation. All issues that are naturally aligned with multiple SDGs. So can you talk a little bit about what Rockefeller's commitment is to the SDGs, why you think the SDGs are so critical to advancing your work, and the way you work with the UN to help partner and drive efforts in the space?
So the Rockefeller Foundation's mission for the over 100 years that it has existed has been to promote the well-being of humanity. And that has taken different shapes and forms over the years, and we've always tried to align ourselves with what the big challenges of our times are and where we think philanthropy has a critical role to play. I think the SDGs have been instrumental and have done an amazing job in aligning the public sector, the private sector, the philanthropic sector, civil society, around a common set of goals and set a target that we can all collectively move towards. And we all have different roles to play in how we get there and what we have to contribute, but I think it helps take all of our collective efforts and move in the same direction. And then the programs that you mentioned, they all in one way or another fall under one of the SDGs. And then that's what we aim to do internally as well, kind of keep that as a goalpost and say, how do we get there?
Yeah, that's great. This issue of financing is obviously a central topic to conversations that are happening here in Davos, but also just thinking about SDG implementation in general. So the numbers are pretty staggering. So I think $5 to $7 trillion a year needed to finance the goals, but also some pretty impressive statistics around the fact that the capital already exists in our market. It's just figuring out how do we redirect it to be able to finance the things that we're trying to do. So I'm wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about what Rockefeller is doing on innovative financing for the SDGs, including your work with Zero Gap and innovative financing mechanisms like blended finance.
So one of the other areas where I think the SDGs have been extremely helpful has been kind of sizing up what the funding gap and the funding needs are. Because, we collectively, as a sector, have for a long time talked about we don't have enough capital available between public resources and philanthropic resources to do all the things that we want to do. But with the SDGs, all of a sudden we had a price tag attached to it. And a price tag that's not in the billions, but as you mentioned, in the trillions. And there is no clear one strategy in place in terms of how we close the gap. And as you said, clearly there's a lot of money available in capital markets. But then the question becomes, what are the mechanisms and products, like real viable capital market mechanisms and products that you can put in place so you can take some of that money and deploy it towards programs that deliver environmental goods or social goods or economic goods as well. And that's a critical question because most of those products don't exist today. And that's why you don't see the money flowing. So with the Zero Gap portfolio that we have at the foundation, our goal is to be at the cutting edge of finding and helping develop these mechanisms. So we grant fund the research and development of products and solutions across asset classes. So, you mentioned blended finance, that is more a private equity type structure, and that's one part of the solution, but the realization through, this learning process we've all been on has also been there isn't one asset class or type of solution that's going to fix it. So we need to be looking at creative ways of deploying insurance products. We need to be looking at what role fixed income products like bonds has to play, and then what we can do across multiple areas of work. So it's fascinating. Again, as I said, innovation is, you don't have a straightforward answer. It's a risky business to be in, but we also believe that with the type of capital that we bring to the table, as opposed to the private sector, the public sector, we have the ability to take on the risk of, say, we'll place a bet on this, and if it doesn't work, then, we took that risk, and we can go and find the next thing that may.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. This idea that you talked about the philanthropic community having a unique role to play that maybe the private sector and the public sector aren't able to necessarily play in as effectively. I'm wondering if you can maybe explore a little bit of that a little more. So we've seen some pretty impressive, private sector movement, including through things like the Business Sustainable Development Commission. We've seen, a lot of coalitions come together in the public sector. I think we've seen a couple of things in the philanthropic sector, like the SDG Philanthropy platform and a couple of others. But can you talk about maybe what the potential is for the philanthropic sector to drive the change at the scale needed? And what are some kind of actionable solutions that the sector as a whole should be thinking of as we figure out how we implement between now and 2030?
So perhaps I could start with a couple of examples,
sure,
because I think that helps make it concrete, and then you can link it back to the different efforts that are going on. So one of the things that we funded, and it was actually one of the UN agencies, so UNCCD, right. The UN Convention to Combat Desertification, 2.5 years, I know, we have a lot of acronyms in this line of business, but we funded them to look at this idea of creating a blended finance fund, where you bring in resources from the development finance community and the institutional investment community to invest in projects that combat desertification. Sure. So basically take land that has been degraded and bring it back into a status where it's actually productive land again. Right. And it's a massive problem at a global scale. If you look at the numbers, they're staggering in right. terms of 30% of the land being degraded, and you're adding on so much every year. And if you look at it, if you're an investment banker, you look at it like, I don't know what you're talking about, degraded land, and what does that mean? So there's a lot of work to be done, and we did that with a grant where we said, okay, what does it actually mean? Like, what is the problem? If we're talking about concrete projects that the money can flow into, what is it? It's things like agroforestry. It's things like investing in rubber plantations. It's a lot of those things. So we gave a grant to figure out what the concept could look like, what the underlying investments could be, and how you put it together. And then from there, the UNCCD selected a fund manager, Mirova. So then you place it over into the right. capital market side to say, okay, this is what we have, how do you take it forward? And they're aiming for first close this quarter. They have already gotten commitments, public commitments, they also have some private ones, but public commitments from the European Investment Bank for 45 million and from AFD, the French Development Agency as well, for 35 million to take the first layer of risk, and then on top of that bring in a lot of institutional capital. And if you think about that, it's ways of bringing things that we thought were not investable right. or insurable because we just did not know enough about those areas, whether that's degraded land or it's forests or it's, reefs or what it could be in that natural space, and wrap a financing mechanism around it that all of a sudden the capital markets understand and they know what to do with.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. For our viewers who are watching who maybe are not as familiar with the technicalities of financing and the different asset classes and just the technicalities of everything, can you maybe speak a little bit to what everyday viewers should be thinking about when it comes to financing for development and how they can be an active part of helping to further the conversation, working with philanthropies and other organizations to drive that change?
So I think, all of us as individuals have a role to play as investors, right. and it's not that we all need to have a lot of money sitting in our bank account to say, okay, how do I invest it? We all have pension plans, we all have some resources available somehow that we can influence the direction of, right? So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. The more we kind of raise this question of we want our investments to be aligned with social values without compromising on financial returns. The more we have that in the public domain in terms of a conversation, I think the more awareness it creates in the broader financial community, as well as, let's do more in that space where we think they're viable products. And then I think no matter what sector you work for, whether you're in the private or you work for, an agency like the UN or you work for a philanthropy, when we're thinking of programs and projects that can make a difference, right? And there are many of them. The key question behind all of them ends up being, how are we going to finance it? Sure. Like, where's the money going to come from? And then we start to look around. And I think there's lots of examples out there in terms of what we can do, that we can draw inspiration from. Right. And the more we kind of look for that early on when we're forming new partnerships and we're looking for solutions, I think the more successful we'll get in the long run.
That's great. Yeah, and I think exactly as you said, it's all about partnerships. You know, the SDGs are a partnership framework, and so it's really exciting to see what Rockefeller is doing to help drive these priorities forward, and how individuals who are watching can be part of the process. So thank you so much for joining us, Saadia, and it's really exciting to see what's going on. We're looking forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great, and thank you to all of you for joining us. We will be back for SDG Live again throughout the day. You can join us by following along at #SDG Live, or by visiting us at sdglive.org. Thanks.